I'm Kalundi Serumaga. Actually, my full name is Kalundi Robert Serumaga. I've been involved in the arts from my childhood, mainly in the area of theater, but I later became a filmmaker. I've worked largely as a documentary filmmaker, but I've also done a lot of television work, even television dramas. I've done a fair amount of theater work. I was also the director of the Uganda National Cultural Centre for a period of about 4 years. At one point I was the head of studies at a place called Kampala Film School. I'm very interested in questions of voice, letting the Africans speak and speak from their history and their culture. I would dedicate a lot of work to that. So I also write a lot. I worked for 10 years as a radio talk show host, where I brought these things in as well. Currently, I'm working on a number of theater productions that I hope will see the light of day next year. I'm involved in indigenous native activism. I'm a member of the Parliament of the Kingdom of Uganda, and I've been an active campaigner around those issues for a long time. I grew up watching my father run rehearsals even from our house. When I was in my very, very early teens, I was basically an apprentice in his theater company. But all of that was interrupted by exile. He ended up in exile because of his artistic and political activities. But when I got to university age, I started again. We had a small traditional dance troupe when I was living in the UK. We used to try and do traditional dance performances and drumming and so on. And a lot of performance poetry. I used to do a lot of that. And I eventually decided to come back home. And so I got involved by that time qualified as a filmmaker. So I got involved in freelance filmmaking. And I think I've done every aspect of it, from voiceovers to direction to camera work to set design to editing, the whole thing. And I began to develop my own drama concepts and whatever. But that got interrupted when I decided to apply and get the job as a director of the National Cultural Centre. When I left, I got a little bit involved in so-called NGO development work. Finally went back to documentary filmmaking after that. I've been involved in so many different things. I think credits appear everywhere. I guess the two things that I could remember, or two or three things I could remember was we did a very interesting production of King Oedipus at the National Theatre with Tebere Arts. We did a very interesting production of Nikolai Gogol's The Government Inspector. It was interesting because I have a very close friend, he's Ugandan, from Western Uganda, who is very interested in language, and he had studied languages in the Soviet Union as it was then. And he had on him an original script of Nikolai Gogol's play, The Government Inspector, in Russian. And so we did an experiment to translate it directly from Russian into his language. It's interesting because it actually has 2 more acts than the English version. And then we staged also at the National Theatre, pretty well known, called Ntare Mwine. He came with a script for a play called Biro, which is a one-person play. And we helped him turn it into a play, which he performed at the National Theatre. Of course, I also staged my father's play, Majangwa, at the National Theatre. Yeah. And I also took Majangwa to Nairobi and performed at what was then the Phoenix Theatre at one of their festivals there. And more recently, I was part of Kampala International Theatre Festival. Last year, I directed a play, the Ugandan production, a play called For My Negativity, which is also a one-person play. What I like most is bringing a script to life and helping an actor develop a lot of confidence in the value of what they're doing on stage. And we were quite thoroughly drilled in performance, especially physical performance, when I was an apprentice at Abafumi Theatre Company. So I like to bring that out in them. But I believe a play doesn't truly live until all the people who created it have died. And then people who have nothing to do with the originators stage it, and stage it well. Then that's when a play, I think, is truly alive, because it has outlived its originators, and that's when its real value comes. Anything by a playwright called Wycliffe Chiyingi, whom you probably have never heard of. Yeah, because he wrote only in Luganda. But he wrote for television, he wrote for radio, and he wrote for the stage. And he wrote, all his plays are amazing, very tightly constructed set pieces. Yeah, we actually staged a festival for him at the National Theatre when his theatre group, this is in 2000, by which time his theatre group was 40 years old. Yeah, and he passed away a few years ago because the scripts are so detailed, they're easy to put them on. There are many, many other plays in the world that I think are good. I don't limit myself just to the African. There's a brilliant play I once read called Passing Places, and by a man called Stephen Greenhorn. He's Scottish. There's another very good play by an Irish playwright called, I think, Brian or Brendan Friel, called Philadelphia, Here I Come. It's about migration from a poor country, hopefully to a rich one. Very appropriate, I think, for Africa. Some of the very old Irish plays from the 1920s by a man called Sean O'Casey would be very good. But specifically here for Uganda, I would really go with Chiyingi. Chiyingi is a very deeply unexplored in the modern times actor. Particularly two of his plays, again, they're very, very well done, very well written, and very well directed. But you see, one of the challenges I see with Kampala International Theatre Festival is that when they take a Ugandan play, they tend to take an English language one. And it's a question I've raised again. Our relationship to language here in Uganda is kind of different to relationship with the language in other parts of East Africa, or the old East Africa. With Tanzania basically banned native languages apart from Kiswahili. Kenya nationalized Kiswahili in the sense that they took it away from the indigenous speakers and turned it into something else. There was that famous hostility to local language drama in the days of Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I'll marry when I want, and so on. But we have had a different cultural path here, which people don't understand who don't come from Uganda. And there's a lot of drama that takes place in local languages in Uganda that could be explored a lot more. What I'd like most to see also is to take any kind of play, as long as it's a good story, and migrate it between languages, as we did with Nikolai Gogol's play. We took it from Russian into Runyankore. You can do that with many other plays. So you move with the scripts and you adapt it to the language. You see, we didn't simply transliterate it, which is a very big problem with translation. There were some people here a few years ago, about a decade and a half ago, actually I think longer because I was at the theater at the time, 20 years ago. They got a play by Bertolt Brecht called Mother Courage and Her Children and translated it into Luganda. But I don't think it was done very well. I mean, the Luganda was perfect.